Good morning. So glad to be with you all again today. Welcome to Bible class with Andre and Betty. We're continuing our studies from the Gospel according to John. And today we will be focusing on Jesus, arrested, betrayed, denied, and put on trial. So thank you all for being here with us today, and thank you for your support and encouragement. Remember that you can view these videos on YouTube or on Facebook. My email account is bjt1125@yahoo.com. And on YouTube, it's just Betty Thomas. And then you can key in the book that you want to study out of the many books that we've been through during this ministry. So thank you all for being with us today. We're going to be looking at John chapter 18. And again, Jesus, arrested, betrayed, denied, and put on trial. So let's begin in verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Cedron, where was a garden, into which he entered, and his disciples. With this verse 1 beginning with when, it refers to the fact that Jesus had taught the words of John chapter 14 through 17, and in 17 he prayed. And when this was done, then he went forth because he's on his way to the cross. And now we're going to see him betrayed and arrested. Verse 2. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place at this garden. He knew the place, for Jesus oftentimes resorted there with his disciples. So this was a place familiar to Jesus and his disciples. Verse 3. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. So Judas, going to this place, knowing that Jesus oftentimes came there. And when it says he received a band of men, that's a company, group of people who were there to arrest Jesus and eventually get him to die on the cross. And so Jesus, in verse 4, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, whom seek you? Who are you looking for? They answered in verse 5, they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus saith unto them, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. Judas stood with the soldiers and the company sent from the religious leaders to arrest him. When Jesus says, I am he, this is the 14th I am statement that he makes about himself. So he asks Judas and the rest of them, whom are you looking for? As soon then, in verse 6, as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. Now, if you study the book of Psalms, you'll find in Psalm number 40, verse 14, that this is prophesied to happen. And here we are nearing the end of the gospel according to John, and that scripture of Psalm number 14 is fulfilled. Verse 7. Then asked he them again, whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Now we need to understand that it was Jesus, the Son of Man, who paid our sin debt. Jesus, being the Son of God, commended his spirit back to the Lord before he died on the cross. And so it is Jesus in his humanity that paid our sin debt. And so verse 7 again, then asked Jesus them again, whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 8, Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore ye seek me, let these go their ways, speaking of his disciples. If I'm who you've come for, I've already answered your question, so let my disciples go. And he said that because of verse 9 that says, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spake, of them which thou gavest me have I lost none. So he's fulfilling John 17 verse 12 when he said, none are lost but the son or perdition. So he said that to fulfill that saying. Verse 10. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus, and this is also recorded in Mark and Luke and Matthew. Verse 11. Then said Jesus unto Peter, put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? So in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus was in agony in the garden, he prayed 3 times, asking, if it's your will, Father, remove this cup from me. So to understand this cup that he's asking to be delivered from, we need to look at Hebrews chapter 5, beginning in verse 7. Who, speaking of Melchizedek in Genesis, but also he was a type of Jesus in the New Testament. So verse 7 in Hebrews 5 says, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him, called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So the cup that Jesus says I must drink is to pay the sin debt in full. And so Jesus is now going to begin to be brought before the religious leaders. Verse 12. Then the band of the company of soldiers and the captain and officers of the Jews took Jesus and bound him. They handcuffed him or in some way tied his hands together. Verse 13. And led him away to Annas first. Now, Annas, this would be the first time he's put on trial, and there will be 5 people that he will stand before, that Jesus will stand before, in order that their final determination is that they would release Barabbas, who was a robber, a seditionist, every evil thing, and they would ask him to be released and Jesus crucified. But Annas is the high priest of the Sadducees, and Caiaphas is the high priest of the Pharisees. And you can learn that in the book of Acts, chapter 4, that Annas was high priest of the Sadducees. So reading verse 13 again. And led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. And so Caiaphas is the son-in-law of Annas. Verse 14. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And Caiaphas said this in John 11, verses 49 and 50, and the saying didn't come from Caiaphas himself, but the Holy Spirit put it up on his heart to say these words. And now we're going to see Peter in his doubt, in his denial. Now, Peter didn't deny who Jesus was. He denied that he knew that he was a disciple of Jesus or an apostle. And we'll see this. Verse 15. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. In Acts 4 and 6, Annas and the Sanhedrin council is stated that John was known unto the high priest, and he's named in Acts chapter 4, verse 16. But Peter stood at the door without or outside the palace. Then went out that other disciple, and John is speaking of himself when he talks about this other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Verse 17, then said the damsel or the young woman that kept the door unto Peter, art not thou also one of this man's disciples? He said, I am not. Verse 18, and the servants and officers stood there, who made a fire of coals, for it was cold. And they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. So instead of going in with Jesus, he sat with the servants of the high priest and warmed himself. Verse 19. The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine, his teaching and his preaching, the gospel of the kingdom. The high priest asked Jesus about this. Verse 20, Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort or come, and in secret have I said nothing. Verse 21, Jesus says, why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said. So Jesus would not give the high priest the answer he was looking for, but Jesus did let him know that he had preached in the synagogues and the temple, and that the people whom he had taught could answer his questions. Answer the question of the high priest. Verse 22. And when he had thus spoken, when Jesus had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, answerest thou the high priest so? He slapped him, one of the greatest insults that one man could do to another man. But he slapped Jesus in the face. Verse 23, Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil, but if well, why smitest thou me? So Jesus is challenging them to say in words or show how he deserved the treatment that he was getting. Verse 24, now Annas had sent him bound unto Caiaphas the high priest. So this is the second trial that Jesus is going to stand before the Caiaphas to be tried. Verse 25, and Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. They said therefore unto him, art not thou also one of his disciples? He denied it and said, I am not. So this is the second denial that Peter claimed to not to be one of Jesus's disciples. And Jesus had told Peter that before the cock crow, that he would deny him 3 times. Verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, did not I see thee in the garden with him? Verse 27, Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew, or the rooster crowed. So this is 3 times that Peter denies that he's with Jesus and one of his disciples. And Caiaphas is the high priest, and they are examining Jesus to prove him to be a criminal, but Jesus took the criminal's place, and that includes all of us. And now Jesus is, the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, are going to bring Jesus before Pilate, who is the government of the Roman Empire, to the Jews specifically. Verse 28, then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. So this is the 3rd trial that Jesus is going to go through. And it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So their hypocrisy is shown in that they're trying to kill Jesus, yet they don't want to be a part of going into the judgment hall because they would be defiled. But at the same time, they're criminalizing Jesus. Verse 29. Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring ye against this man? And we know Satan is the accuser of the brethren from Revelation chapter 12, that Satan, whenever accusations are made against someone, that accusation comes from Satan. Verse 30. They answered and said unto him, this is the religious leaders, headed by Caiaphas. They answered and said unto him, if he were not a malefactor or criminal, we would not have delivered him up unto thee. So they're accusing Jesus of being a criminal. Then said Pilate unto them in verse 31, Take ye him and judge him according to your law, Judaism. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that is, by crucifixion. They could stone people to death, but they could not put a person to death by crucifixion. And this was said, verse 32, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. And he signified that in John chapter 3, verse 14, and John chapter 12, verse 32, when he foretold that he would die the death by crucifixion. Verse 33. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus, and said unto him, Are you the King of the Jews? Verse 34, Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Is this what you really think, or have somebody else put these thoughts in your mind? Verse 35, Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? So Pilate does not know, and he's trying to figure out why the religious leaders would bring Jesus to him to be examined. Verse 36, Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from here, from this world. And so Jesus is answering the question by telling him that he has a kingdom, but also there's a kingdom in this world that is ruled by evil through Satan. So therefore, in verse 37, Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king, but here's why I came into the world. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. And everyone that is of the truth, who really want to know the truth, heareth my voice. I didn't come into the world to be king. I came into the world to be redeemer. 38. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and saith unto them, I find in him no fault. And that's the first time Pilate had examined him and he found no fault in Jesus. That's number 1, verse 39. Pilate says to the Jews, "But ye have a custom or a tradition that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will ye therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Do you want me to release Jesus to you?" And they said, Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. And so the other Gospels give more details about Barabbas's sedition and rioting and attempts to overthrow the government. But they would rather have a true criminal than a redeemer and a one who came into the world to save sinners. They saw themselves as righteous before God. But only Jesus is the righteous one. And when we believe him, then God puts on our account that we are righteous. We cannot be righteous without the Lord, without Jesus and his finished work. So now we will close for today's lesson, and next week we'll be on chapter 19, and we'll move forward to the day of Jesus' crucifixion. So thank you all for visiting with us. I'm so glad to share with you each week, and I really love receiving comments from those of you who share with me. So you all have a great day and a great week. Love you guys.